Picture this, folks. It's 2017, and Lawrence Hudd is living his best Canadian life. He's got a house, he's paying his taxes, and he's probably apologizing for things that aren't even his fault. You know, standard Canadian stuff. But then, out of nowhere, the Canadian government decides to play a twisted game of Monopoly with Hudd's life. And let me tell you, it's not the fun kind where you get to be the tiny metal dog. No, this is the kind where the government becomes that one friend who flips the board when they're losing. Except instead of just scattering fake money and tiny plastic houses, they're scattering Hudd's actual life. It's like they took the phrase, "go directly to jail, do not pass go, do not collect $200" way too literally, and poor Hudd didn't even get to roll the dice.
Now you might be thinking, surely there must be some mistake. This is Canada we're talking about, land of politeness and universal healthcare. But no, my friends, this is where our story takes a turn darker than a hockey player's missing tooth. The Canadian government, in all its maple syrup-fueled wisdom, decided to go full authoritarian.
What followed was a legal battle so convoluted it makes the rules of curling look straightforward. Hudd found himself thrust into a Kafkaesque nightmare, fighting against a system that seemed determined to prove that no good deed goes unpunished. And by good deed, I mean the simple act of existing as a law-abiding citizen. Buckle up, folks, because this roller coaster of injustice is about to leave the station, and it's got more twists than a pretzel factory run by M. Night Shyamalan. Let's dive into the nitty-gritty of this governmental gong show, shall we? In 2017, the Canadian government decided to play a game of What's Yours Is Mine with Lawrence Hudd. They waltzed into his life like an uninvited guest at a potluck dinner, except instead of bringing a casserole, they brought a whole heap of trouble. The government seized Hudd's home and tax records faster than you can say sorry, eh?
Now, you might be wondering, what heinous crime did Hudd commit to deserve such treatment? Did he try to smuggle maple syrup across the border? Did he speak ill of Wayne Gretzky? Nope. As far as anyone can tell, his great offense was being Lawrence Hudd. That's it. That's the crime. The government's actions were about as legal as using a hockey stick to rob a Tim Hortons.
But wait, there's more, because apparently illegally seizing someone's property wasn't enough of a thrill for these bureaucratic adrenaline junkies. They decided to spice things up by peppering Hudd with more false charges than a faulty credit card machine. It was like they were playing a twisted game of pin the tail on the innocent Canadian, and Hudd was the unwilling donkey. It was a legal merry-go-round, except instead of cheerful music and painted horses, it was all bureaucratic mumbo-jumbo and soul-crushing anxiety, and poor Hudd was stuck on this ride. Now let's talk about the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It's supposed to be the superhero of Canadian law, swooping in to protect citizens from governmental overreach. But in Hudd's case, it was treated more like a suggestion than a binding legal document. The government violated Hudd's rights with the enthusiasm of a beaver building a dam, except instead of creating a home, they were destroying one.
The Charter guarantees things like the right to be secure against unreasonable search or seizure, and the right to life, liberty and security of the person. But apparently, the government officials involved in Hudd's case thought these were more like guidelines than actual rules. They were playing fast and loose with his rights, like they were in a high-stakes poker game. Except the chips were Lawrence Hudd's fundamental freedoms.
This wasn't just a little oopsie or a slight bend of the rules. No, this was a full-on pretzel twist of justice, a contortion so severe it would make a yoga instructor wince. The government's actions were less, "We stand on guard for thee," and more, "We stand on guard for whatever illegal thing we feel like doing." It was a charter violation so blatant you half expected the ghost of Pierre Trudeau to rise from the grave just to facepalm. But here's the kicker. This wasn't happening in some dystopian alternate universe where Canada is ruled by moose overlords. It just goes to show that even in the land of politeness and poutine, rights can be trampled faster than you can say double-double. And poor Lawrence Hudd was caught in the middle of this constitutional dumpster fire, probably wondering if he could claim refugee status in his own country. Section 4. Justice delayed, the long road to a hearing. Now you might think that after all this tomfoolery, the Canadian justice system would spring into action faster than a Mountie chasing a maple syrup thief. But no, my friends, that would be too simple, too logical, too just.
Instead, Lawrence Hudd found himself trapped in a legal limbo that made purgatory look like a day at the beach. The delays in his case were longer than a Canadian winter and about as pleasant. The court system moved with all the speed and urgency of a sloth on vacation. It was like watching paint dry, except the paint was Hud's life, and the wall was his rapidly eroding faith in the justice system.
Every time it seemed like progress might be made, the courts would hit the snooze button on justice. But wait, a glimmer of hope appeared on the horizon, like the first Tim Hortons after a long drive through the prairies.
Justice P. Bradley, in a moment of what can only be described as actually doing their job, ordered a charter rights hearing. It was as if someone in the justice system finally remembered that they were supposed to be, serving justice.
This hearing was set, but then adjourned 10 times. Listen closely, folks, because this is where things get interesting. And by interesting, I mean infuriating. Because remember, this is the Canadian legal system we're talking about. They don't do anything quickly unless it's apologizing or playing hockey.
So, of course, this hearing date was treated less like a deadline and more like a polite suggestion. It was postponed more times than a Canadian trying to end a phone conversation. Okay, bye now. No, you hang up first. No, you. Okay, bye. No, really, bye.
And all the while, Hud was left hanging, probably considering a change of name and moving to a remote igloo where the long arm of Canadian law couldn't reach him.
Section 5. Finally, after more false starts than a nervous teenager learning to drive stick shift, November 22nd, 2021 rolled around. This was it, the big day. The day justice would finally be served, right?
Oh, you sweet summer child. If you thought that, you clearly haven't been paying attention to this Kafkaesque nightmare of a legal proceeding.
Lawrence Hud, our beleaguered protagonist, probably looking like he's aged 20 years in the past 4, believed that he would return home after his charter rights hearing because, after all, this is Canada. But he did not foresee the parade of lawyers, judges, and bureaucrats, all ready to participate in what can only be described as the legal equivalent of a clown car.
Lawrence Hud could not attend, but was confident that his lawyer, not to mention the court, would uphold his charter rights. After all, the false charges and accusations were all withdrawn on July 15, 2019, in the Ontario Superior Court of Justice.
But here's where things get really interesting, and by interesting, I mean infuriating. Because despite all the build-up, despite all the delays and postponements, despite the fact that this hearing was supposed to be Hud's chance to finally get some justice, it turned out to be a gross miscarriage of justice, and it is all in the court record that is now before the Supreme Court of Canada.
That's right. Lawrence Hud is now representing himself with his charter rights case in the Supreme Court of Canada, file number 41345, because of the miscarriage of justice at his charter rights hearing on November 22nd, 2021. And we'll tell you all about that in the next video.
Section 6, the ripple effect, implications for all Canadians. Now you might be thinking, well, that miscarriage of justice is a bummer for Lawrence Hud, but what does it have to do with me? I'm just sitting here minding my own business like any normal Canadian.
But here's the thing, folks. Hud's fight isn't just about Hud. It's about all of us. It's about what happens when the government decides that rights are more of a buffet than a set menu. This case is like a canary in a coal mine. Except the canary is Lawrence Hud and the coal mine is the entire concept of civil liberties in Canada.
If the government can do this to Lawrence Hud, what's to stop them from doing it to you, or your neighbour, or one or more of your friends and relatives?
The implications of this case are broader than a moose's antlers. It's not just about one man's struggle against the system, it's about the very foundations of Canadian democracy. It's about whether the Charter of Rights and Freedoms is worth more than the paper it's printed on. It's about whether innocent until proven guilty is still a thing, or if we've moved to a new system of guilty until proven to be Lawrence Hud, in which case, still guilty.
This governmental overreach is like a beaver dam blocking the river of justice. And if we don't do something about it, we might all find ourselves up the creek without a paddle, or a canoe, or even a creek, because the government might have seized that too. So the next time you're sitting there, enjoying your poutine and feeling comfortably smug about being Canadian, remember Lawrence Hud. Remember that your rights are only as strong as your willingness to defend them.
And maybe, just maybe, consider that the real Canada goose we need to worry about isn't the one hissing at you in the park, but the one sitting in the halls of power, ready to take a great big governmental dump all over your civil liberties.